Custer's last stand along the Little Bighorn River on June 25, 1876, was the climax of a U.S. Army campaign that had been months in the making. As the Army determined who was responsible for the defeat, scrutiny began to fall on an 11-sentence order Custer's commanding officer gave him approximately 72 hours before the fight. So exactly what were Custer's orders? Did he follow them? And if he deviated from them, was he justified in doing so? In early 1876, the U.S. Army had been tasked with forcing native tribes deemed hostile, specifically Lakota and Northern Cheyenne, back onto their reservations. It was supposed to be the last big Indian War, and the mission was given to General Philip Sheridan, the commander of the Military Division of the Missouri. His plan involved surrounding the natives with 3 columns of troops, cutting off any escape. A column led by General George Crook would leave Fort Fetterman and move north, while Colonel John Gibbon would lead another column eastward from Fort Ellis in Montana. The final column would be commanded by Lt Col George Custer, who would move west from Fort Abraham Lincoln in Dakota Territory. Custer had ably served General Sheridan for over a decade since the Civil War, and Sheridan had come to rely on Custer, getting him the results he wanted. As the prep work began, Custer was abruptly summoned to Washington, D.C. to testify in a series of congressional hearings. These hearings investigated graft and corruption at the highest levels of the War Department. Custer enthusiastically testified, even though most of his testimony was rumor and hearsay. Custer also named names and implicated Orville Grant in the corrupt rings. Orville Grant was the younger brother of the president, Ulysses Grant. President Grant really didn't like Custer running his mouth about his brother, and as commander-in-chief of the military was in a position to do something about it. As Custer left Washington to resume preparing for the upcoming campaign, Sheridan received the word. Custer was out. Find someone else to lead the Dakota Column. Sheridan settled on Brigadier General Alfred Terry, commander of the Department of Dakota and Custer's immediate superior. Terry had graduated from Yale Law School and had been a law clerk before the Civil War. During the war, he had seized Fort Fisher, a tough nut that had taken the Union years to crack and for which he had earned a general's star. He had a reputation as a talented and efficient administrator, but wasn't exactly thrilled being a field commander for Sheridan's campaign. He'd never fought Indians before. As Terry assumed command of the Dakota Column, he was soon approached by Custer himself. Humiliated and distraught, Custer begged for help from his boss. With Terry's guidance, Custer sent a final telegram to President Grant. I respectfully but most earnestly request that while not allowed to go in command of the expedition, I may be permitted to serve with my regiment in the field. I appeal to you as a soldier to spare me the humiliation of seeing my regiment march to meet the enemy and I not share in its dangers. Terry also requested Custer's presence. After all, he did have experience fighting Plains warriors that Terry didn't. Grant relented. Custer could go, but only under Terry's supervision. Throughout June, the columns worked their way toward the target area, south of the Yellowstone River. Gibbon's and Terry's columns united, and on June 21st, Terry developed his battle plan. A recent scouting expedition had located a large Indian trail along Rosebud Creek, and it was probable the main village was on one of the main streams west of the creek. It wasn't even a question that any army outfit would defeat the native warriors in battle. What concerned Terry, Gibbon, and Custer was the possibility the village would break up and dissolve before they could contain it. Gibbon's force contained a mix of infantry and cavalry and moved slowly. He estimated it would take him 5 days to get to the mouth of the Little Bighorn. But Custer's 7th Cavalry was much more nimble and could cover a lot more ground. Terry planned to use Custer's cavalry to surround the hostile village from the south and box it in against Gibbon's approaching troops. June 26 was going to be the day. Each man reviewed the plan and agreed with its concept and execution. The next morning, Terry's written order was delivered to Custer shortly before his regiment moved out. Sentence numbers have been added for reference. Headquarters of the Department of Dakota in the field. Camp at mouth of Rosebud River, Montana Territory, June 22, 1876. Lt Col Custer, 7th Cavalry. Colonel. The Brigadier General commanding directs that as soon as your regiment can be made ready for the march, you will proceed up the Rosebud in pursuit of the Indians whose trail was discovered by Major Reno a few days since. It is, of course, impossible to give you any definite instructions in regard to this movement, and were it not impossible to do so, the department commander places too much confidence in your zeal, energy, and ability to wish to impose upon you precise orders which might hamper your action when nearly in contact with the enemy. He will, however, indicate to you his own views of what your action should be, and he desires that you should conform to them unless you shall see sufficient reason for departing from them. He thinks that you should proceed up the Rosebud until you ascertain definitely the direction in which the trail above spoken of leads. Should it be found, as it appears almost certain that it will be found, to turn towards the Little Horn, he thinks that you should still proceed southward, perhaps as far as the headwaters of the Tongue, and then turn toward the Little Horn, feeling constantly, however, to your left, so as to preclude the possibility of the escape of the Indians to the south or southeast by passing around your left flank. The column of Colonel Gibbon is now in motion for the mouth of the Bighorn. As soon as it reaches that point, it will cross the Yellowstone and move up at least as far as the forks of the Big and Little Horns. Of course, its future movements must be controlled by circumstances as they arise, but it is hoped that the Indians, if upon the Little Horn, may be so nearly enclosed by the two columns that their escape will be impossible. The department commander desires that on your way up the Rosebud you should thoroughly examine the upper part of Tulloch's Creek, and that you should endeavor to send a scout through to Colonel Gibbon's column with information of the results of your examination. The lower part of this creek will be examined by a detachment from Colonel Gibbon's command. The supply steamer will be pushed up the Bighorn as far as the forks of the river is found to be navigable for that distance, and the department commander, who will accompany the column of Colonel Gibbon, desires you to report to him there not later than the expiration of the time for which your troops are rationed, unless in the meantime you receive further orders. Very respectfully, your obedient servant, E.W. Smith, Captain, 18th Infantry, AAAG. Now, one of the factors that fuels debate over these orders is the language Terry used in his order. The issue boils down to these questions. What exactly did Terry order Custer to do, and how much freedom did Custer have in the execution of those orders? Compare these orders to another set of orders from Terry. On June 10th, 12 days prior, Terry sent Major Marcus Reno, Custer's second-in-command, on a quick scouting expedition. Terry's orders to Reno began, Major M.A. Reno, 7th Cavalry, with 6 companies, right wing, of his regiment and 1 gun from the Gatling battery, will proceed at the earliest practicable moment to make a reconnaissance of the Powder River from the present camp to the mouth of the Little Powder. From the last named point, he will cross to the headwaters of Mizpah Creek and descend that creek to its junction with the Powder River. Thence he will cross the Pumpkin Creek and Tongue River and descend the Tongue to its junction with the Yellowstone. Note the repeated use of the word will. Reno's orders that told him, you will do such and such, have much more in common with typical Civil War era orders that simply told commanders, this will happen. There's no room for interpretation here. In his entire order, Terry only explicitly directs Custer to do something once, in the first sentence. You will proceed up the Rosebud in pursuit of the Indians. Later in the order, Terry desires, he indicates, he thinks, but this opening sentence contains the most plainly direct order Terry gives Custer. Terry then acknowledges the leeway he'll have to give his subordinate and compliments Custer's zeal, energy, and ability. This was probably Terry's way of throwing a bone to Custer's ego after his recent public embarrassment. It worked, too. Custer copied that line into his last letter to his wife. But note the last few words. Terry does not want to hamper Custer's action when nearly in contact with the enemy. Well, what does that mean? How close would Custer have to be in order to qualify as nearly in contact? Taken to the extreme, it could be argued that Custer, operating in unknown territory miles from any sort of support and in an area populated with hostiles, was nearly in contact when he left Terry's camp. Terry's next sentence desires that Custer stick with Terry's concept, unless Custer sees sufficient reason for departing from it. Again, what does sufficient reason mean, and who determines if the reason for deviating from the orders is sufficient? If, say, the Indian trail went from stale to being very fresh, less than a day old, or if Custer felt his force had been discovered and compromised, would that give sufficient reason for deviation? Sentences 4 and 5 form the crux of the argument against Custer. Terry orders him to continue south, past the trail's westbound turn. Instead, Custer turned with the trail and followed it to the Little Bighorn Valley. Custer told his officers his plan was to rest the regiment on the 25th, then strike on the 26th. But almost immediately after he made this plan, his men were discovered by natives in the area. Custer thought the village would move before the plan could be put into action, and the worst possible scenario, the hostiles' escape, would occur. This is a valid concern. The problem is that by turning with the trail instead of following south, it can be argued that Custer unnecessarily created that problem. He made his bed, now he'd have to lie in it. In sentence 9, Terry desires that Custer should thoroughly examine the upper or southern portion of Tulloch's Creek. Tulloch's Creek was a waterway that functioned as a possible avenue of approach that hostiles could possibly use, or perhaps even camp on. To properly scout this area, Terry supplied Custer with a scout, George Herendeen, who knew the area well. On June 25th, as Custer's regiment rode toward battle, Herendeen reminded Custer of his mission to scout the creek. Custer failed to use Herendeen. He probably figured he had bigger fish to fry at the moment. Herendeen rode with Reno's men into the valley floor and narrowly survived the fight in the timber. Contemporary soldiers' opinions on the language of these orders fell across a broad spectrum. On one hand, some officers felt that a superior officer's stated thoughts and desires constituted an implied order, and common sense meant interpreting those statements as such. Others felt that the requests Terry made to Custer, along with the wide latitude given to him, barely constituted orders at all. Custer couldn't have disobeyed orders, because there weren't any. Now let's hear your thoughts. What do you think about Terry's last order to Custer? Have you ever worked for a boss whose actual intent could be hard to pin down? Drop a comment with your thoughts, and let's see what you think. And while you're doing that, please hit the like button and subscribe if you haven't already. Thank you.